here is the news. The Apollo 14 astronauts, Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell, landed on the moon at 18 minutes after 4 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, the third group of men ever to land there. They did it matter-of-factly and quietly, saying a few things but nothing memorable, although they had experienced a number of difficulties. Nor had they reached the end of their difficulties when they arrived at the moon. After walking on the moon and performing the jobs and ceremonial chores scheduled for them, they discovered that there was a slight oxygen leak in Mitchell's spacesuit. Space officials in Houston said, however, that that wouldn't affect plans for a spacewalk tomorrow morning. Shepard stepped onto the moon from the landing ship Antares at 6 minutes before 10 o'clock this morning Eastern Time, Mitchell 5 minutes later, and there they stayed until mid-afternoon. At one point,
Shepard has positioned the antenna legs into the lunar surface.
And here comes the S-band antenna cable. Looks more like a kangaroo.
The crew taking each other's picture by the flag.
At one point, Mitchell took the camera off the stand and swung it around the area, describing the features of the moonscape as he did so.
West-northwest. And you should be able to see in the distance Doublet crater. And I've lost it now because of the sun angle, but it's just about on the near horizon. I'm sorry, there are three mounds. Ridges, the near side, the nearest one, the ridge that Doublet is on, and then the far horizon. I'm bringing it on out for you. Doublet is on the second hill that you see. Okay, you're coming in now.
Mitchell returned the camera to the stand, and he and Shepard carried equipment away from the landing ship to set it up.
Okay, I'm going to stop here and rest for a minute now. Let's start things heavier than I expected. Okay, Ed, we've got you in the field of view over to the left now. Okay. Al should be coming in right now, too. There's so many different types of craters around here. We could spend the whole EVA within 100 yards of the limb. Okay, lead on and I'll follow and watch the map for you. Okay, going to your right.
Apollo 14 has had its share of trouble since the mission began last Sunday afternoon. The launch was 40 minutes late because of threatening weather. Then there was a severe problem in the docking of the moon landing craft with the command ship. It took 6 tries to complete that. A battery in the lunar craft gave readings indicating it was low in power, but that was overcome too. And just before the descent this morning, the computer, which was to guide the lunar ship to the moon's surface, the computer developed a malfunction and the astronauts had to take the ship down, at least partially, manually. Shepard had trouble with the radio unit in his suit, and finally, on the way down, a radar unit didn't work until almost the last moment.
The moon landing is always the most dangerous part of the Apollo missions. That was evident early this morning, shortly after 4 a.m. Eastern Time, when astronauts Shepard and Mitchell were about 200 miles from the landing site, nearly 35,000 feet above the moon's surface. A radar system which was to give them their altitude and velocity was not working properly. Without this, a landing was not possible. Mission Control told the astronauts to push a circuit breaker, which recycled the radar. They did this and it started functioning properly. Here, through simulation and the voice of Ed Mitchell, is how it sounded when the problem was resolved.
Okay, velocity light, 57 enter. How's it look, Houston? Would we accept?
Okay, I would like to accept the radar.
Okay, bridging, great. Great.
Problems, but all flights have problems. But each flight plan calls for all kinds of contingency or backup actions. In short, how to deal with emergencies. So far, even with its faults, Mission Control judges Apollo 14 to be a successful mission. This is Sander Van Oker, NBC News, at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston.
Tomorrow, beginning at 5 a.m. Eastern Time, or earlier if necessary, NBC News will televise the second walk on the moon of astronauts Shepard and Mitchell. Beginning at 1:30 in the afternoon, Eastern Time again, it will televise the liftoff of the moon landing craft and its ultimate docking with the command ship.
Good evening. Astronauts Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell, who today became the 5th and 6th persons ever to walk on the moon, are now into their first prolonged sleep period on the lunar surface. Their well-earned rest comes at the end of a difficult and exhausting day that began with still another mechanical problem. This time it was a computer that failed to function properly, and the problem complicated the landing procedure for the Antares lunar spacecraft. Its final descent had to be carried out partly by manual control.
Right on the money. 1,500. Little fast, not bad. Coming through 1,000 feet. 27 feet, right on schedule. 100 feet, 15 feet per second. It looks good. Your fuel is good at 10%. 170 feet out, 2 feet per second down, 8% fuel. You're looking good. Okay, babe. Okay, 170 feet in holding. 1 foot per second down. Want to speed it up a little bit. It says 90 feet. 4 feet per second, 5 feet per second down. 3 feet per second, 40 feet. 3 feet per second, 30. 3 feet per second, looking great. 20 feet. 10. 3 feet per second, contact down. 2, stop. Great. Whoa. Auto. We're on the surface. Okay, we made a good landing.
Roger, Antares.
And then a few hours later, Shepard and Mitchell began their exploration of the moon's surface. Many of their assigned tasks proved to be more difficult than had been expected, and the two men continually fell behind schedule. In the beginning, as we look at pictures of their expedition by foot, there was an audio feedback at the Space Center, so there are some things you'll be hearing twice. What will be seen first is a simulation of Shepard's descent from the lunar spacecraft. As he neared the surface, he released a special mechanism that began the transmission back to Earth of the first color television pictures of Apollo 14 on the moon.
It was on the surface, and it's been a long way, but we're here. And I can see the reason we have a tilt is because we landed on the slope. And I can see the reason we have a tilt is because we landed on the slope. The landing gear appear to be about evening around, getting familiar. Getting familiar with the surface. Getting familiar. Surface in which the forward footpad landed is extremely soft. The forward, matter of fact, it's in a small depression. The soil is so soft that it comes up all the way to the top of the footpad, and even folded over the side to some degree. The same is true of the plus Y strut. Roger. Roger. Okay, we'll move on over. Okay, Ed, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay, Ed, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay. It's very great to be coming down. Roger, bottom step. It's very great to be coming down. Roger, bottom step. one. The last one is a long one. Asset check, very easy to do. Little push, just spring right up. Check, very easy to do. Little push and just spring right up. Okay, pressing on. S-band antenna.
Roger, press.
Again, continuing, the soil is very fine here, very fine grain. And as we mentioned before, there are very few samples that can any size at all. Mostly hand sample size and rocks of generally 1 to 2 inches or less.
A newfangled mount for the American flag proved balky. It took the astronauts 7 minutes to deploy, and they would fall further and further behind their timeline as this moonwalk continued. Mitchell panned the camera for our first detailed look at the Frau Morrow area.
The horizon that the far horizon, Bruce, is a ridge that seems to run around this bowl that we're sitting in. It appears to be a ridge. It runs down from what we called Old Nameless to the south, and it runs to the west. It seems to be roughly circular, but of course we could be a little bit deceived at this point on that score. All right, I've moved around to the next sector now, and there is a fairly significant crater about 250 to 300 yards out. Now, another sector to the right.
Roger.
Facing almost down sun.
Roger, we got your shadow.
And okay, it's a very low spot, the deepest part, I guess, of what we were calling cloverleaf before, although I did not realize how deep that depression was, and I still don't quite...
Okay, zoom out while you're talking.
Can't get the... Okay, can't quite get the relief in my mind because it is so different than what I expected. Okay, lead on and I'll follow and watch the map for you. Okay, going to your right.
The astronauts repeatedly had minor trouble loading their little two-wheel equipment cart, but finally they set off across the moon to deploy their experiments.
Okay, Houston, we're proceeding over a very fine grain regolith we described before. Undulating surface.
Okay, you need to angle left just a little bit.
Slope. Left.
Yeah, you're doing fine now.
Houston, this looks like brown talcum powder. It's so fine in most places.
Roger, the Met's going off to the right.
It was increasing now. Met's trying to find a smooth place to go. Well, I think let's go around this crater here. To the left. I think we can find our way down. Heavens, that's a deep hole. Okay, Houston, we'll be dropping down out of sight for a while, probably.
Roger.
Going down in a depression. Deep, very deep depression compared to what it looked like. Well, I don't know. I don't know either. Let's stop a minute now. I'm not sure, but what we picked just about as good a spot as anywhere. I think so.
600 feet from the LEM, they set up their experiment station. There was much less talk now. The astronauts were working hard and falling farther and farther behind that timeline. One especially balky experiment was the thumper, which was supposed to fire a series of cartridges into the surface to help line up the moonquake sensors. We've condensed some of Ed Mitchell's frustrations.